Living with multiple dogs. Fun and challenging, is it not? This is Learning About Dogs, a podcast for people who love learning about dogs. I'm Sue McGuire, manager of a canine behavior program at a shelter north of San Francisco, and with me, of course, is Kay Laurence of Learning About Dogs. How many dogs is too many? Should you ever have a mother-daughter combination? What about breed mixes? Which ones are complementary and which ones can be a bit of a nightmare when trying to live together? This is all about multiple dogs. I've always had multiple dogs. I never seem to, one time I had no dogs and that was horrible. But I've always seemed to have at least two, often three dogs. And living with multiple dogs, you often have quite a few dogs. You used to breed dogs. Ideal number? Do
Yeah.
you have an ideal number?
Well, we don't, or shall we say, in my lifetime, I've not ever had a restriction on how many dogs I could have. I mean, I started with one, and 6 months later, I got another one to keep him company. Simply because if you're working and you leave a dog alone, it's not easy on the dog. So I went back and got another one from the same breeder. I had Cavaliers to start with, um, and probably if I could say ideal is three if you're a trainer, because you always want to train one on their own, and then the other one's left isolated, and that can cause issues on itself. So if the other one's left with another dog, the isolation is not quite so bad. And I have to split mine. I've got five at the moment, so three of them are over 12. So they go for a separate walk to the youngsters. And to be honest, I don't think the old ones like the youngsters barging through them when they go in out the doorway. So we tend to have no, let the youngsters go out first. Right, now the oldies can go first. So there's always some degree of management to stop life becoming hell for one of them when you're not really paying attention to them.
In terms of group dynamics, have you ever found any groupings that didn't work that well? I mean, I always used to get a lot of grief because I always seemed to have female dogs. Oh, you should never have all female dogs. Really? I thought it
Every
really
time
had more
somebody
to do
comes
with.
up with these rules, so I've had two lots of litter siblings. One I bought in not intentionally. I wanted the boy, but the girl came along as well. Yeah, she stayed for 13 years. And they were very good company. They played together very well. And that was a dog and bitch. And then I had a dog and bitch Gordon that I kept. And I kept two Gordon brothers. The two Gordon brothers, all rightish, but one was a git, which is why I had to keep him because he was quite obnoxious from 4 weeks old. um, and I thought, well, I really can't pass him on to somebody else. But I really liked the other boy. He was everything I wanted. So the only combinations I've ever had an issue with was a mother-daughter combination. But I've had
Hmm. Yeah.
several mother-daughter combinations with no issues. And I've had father-son combinations with absolutely no issues. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. The same as not everybody likes their siblings or their parents. Some people are very
Yeah.
close to a parent and some people are not. So I think it's more down to personalities rather than whether they're related or not.
Yeah.
I
How
mean,
do you? Yeah. Go ahead.
now, I know some people that would happily live. A friend of mine and her mother share exactly the same hobbies. They go and do all their shows together. I can't think of anything worse than doing that with my mother, and I probably think my mother wouldn't want to do that with me. So it's not so much that they are mother and daughter; it was that the combination of their personalities together was not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to
So
watch other things. You have to
go ahead.
watch.
You have to have what? Like what?
So, for instance, the collies like to use other breeds as faux sheep, which for other breeds can be a bit of a miserable life if you let that collie behavior take over. So my first collie used the Cavaliers as sheep, which wasn't very good for them. And now the collies would use the Gordons for sheep. So I'd often have to ask the collies to walk in just to be able to let the other breed go and have a decent run. Otherwise, they'd all end up standing in a heap in front of me. I'd have my dogs gathered. So I think
Yes.
you can have certain breeds that may make life miserable if they live together, and other breeds that living together is a blessing rather than a nuisance.
Oh, yeah. I can attest to that. I'm sure Hank Williams is very tired of being mistaken for a little tan sheep. from my border collie for sure.
But
So
does he respond to it, or does he just go, yeah, whatever, and walk through it?
no, he does respond to it. He freezes in
Yeah,
place.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
or
Then
he
she
comes
needs
up to
to.
me and says, "Would you take care of her, please?" And so, I recognize that early on, and I actually have to put my border collie away when I'm playing games that involve chasing toys, etc., with my little guy. It's just out of
Yeah,
respect to
yeah,
him.
yeah. I mean, you can.
Mm.
Unfortunately, the collies, once they start that behaviour, it's just going to get more and more pleasurable. It's going to
Mm,
really
yes.
grow exponentially as to how much pleasure it gives them. But they're going to, you
Mhm.
can put them into another mode. So often the collies, if they're in fetch and play mode, they won't work sheepdog at the same time. Not all of them, but if you've got a strong fetch and play, they can't do fetch and play and be a sheepdog.
Yeah.
Although I have had a sheepdog that would go around the field with a ball in his mouth, being a sheepdog.
Mm, yeah.
So again, not these hard and fast rules. You can just say generally,
Yeah. Exactly.
but depends on your skill level as to whether you can, see that this is going to become an issue and we need to stop it now. I remember doing a talk to a college group of students that were mostly agriculture and animal based, and the topic I was asked to do was what would I wish I had known at their age, 18, 19-year olds, that I know now. And I think one of the biggest things is to be able to see the difference between a behavior that the dog is going to grow out of as a puppy and a behavior that the puppy dogs that is just going to simply get stronger and stronger to the point where you can't manage it. So something like car chasing in a collie herding type puppy. Oh, no, 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 no. This has to be prevented the minute you see it starting to, this is going to be fun. Oh, look. Oh, car. That's
Hmm.
not going to disappear, but possibly seeking affection, by sitting on your head when they're about 5 months old, that's probably going to fade away. Once they get more
Yeah.
grown up,
Yeah.
they're not going to want to do that. So, being able to tell the difference between a juvenile behavior that will naturally fade as the dog develops and a juvenile behavior that is a juvenile version of an adult behavior that is simply going to get stronger and stronger.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Boy,
seeing
talk
the
about experience. Yeah.
well, the Gordon
Knowing the
setter puppies as a
difference.
litter, and we had a litter of 12. I mean, they'd all stand in a row pointing the chickens when they were 6 weeks old. Chickens are behind a fence, mind you. And you're going to go, well, that ain't disappearing. But it does in a way because the Gordons don't work chickens. So as they mature, chickens, yeah, whatever. They start pointing other things out in the field. Yeah. So if they didn't have the field to grow up into being proper working dogs, they might just stay at pointing chickens. So certain of those juvenile behaviours don't get a chance to mature, the same as the sheepdogs will end up working other dogs. But if they start to work sheep, they would stop working the other dogs because they've got the sheep to work instead.
Hmm. So that brings in the topic of how to bring in another dog and what should be some considerations. We don't want to make broad swipes, but on sometimes we do need to make a little bit of broad swipe about breed a bit. Your
Yeah,
your current
yeah.
resident dogs, not necessarily sex, but age maybe.
I think you also have to think that the resident dog has a right to go, really, no, no, not this one.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
um, I mean, you've got to do this in a shelter situation where presumably the resident dog gets to give the new incoming dog a once over before it's committed.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and I think if they're just going to go, no, get this dog out of my space, I can't live with it. It's not something, oh, we'll train it, oh, we'll get it used to it. I don't know that that's really the avenue to go unless it's unavoidable. I can't think I've ever bought in a dog that's the others didn't want. But there again, a lot depends on how much space you have. So if you've got plenty of space, the same as too many people in a house. If you've ever done house sharing, you can share a large house with a few people, be fine. But share a small house with a lot of people, especially when they're not family and they're coming and going all hours of the day, that can be hell. Absolute nightmare trying to live in those conditions. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
so a lot depends on the actual physical space. So if dogs have got enough space to get out of each other's hair, they could probably live with a dog that's not going to be their best buddy, but we'll just pass. Okay, that's fine. But if you actually force them to share the same space 24 hours around the clock, I can imagine it become very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And this is where you
Yeah.
need the
Well, let's.
skill of being able to recognize a dog could be depressed. They
Oh,
can get depressed. No two ways about that.
oh, yes, I see that. Unfortunately. So let's talk about living conditions. I mean, you need to have space. You need to have the right environment if you're going to have multiple dogs. This is not an
Yeah,
apartment
yeah,
dwelling adventure unless you have the capacity to get outside a lot. A
yeah,
lot.
and and often the people keeping multiple dogs keep multiple small dogs, which people think are easier to manage, but the dynamic of a dog has nothing to do with its physical size.
Yes.
So a small dog may want 16 by 24-meter room to be feel comfortable, and yet a big dog doesn't. So the size of the dog is not relative to how close or how confined it should be.
Mm.
Certain breeds of dogs are so social that they're almost distressed when they're not together, like groups and packs of hounds. My Cavaliers always slept in a heap. The plastic round beds that we have? They would all
Yeah.
get in one of those beds, four of them. Size of a collie, this bed. Now, if the collie was there, they'd just get in on top of the collie, and the collie would be out like a shot because he hated being slept on. Gordon Setter, the Cavaliers could sleep on him. He was like a hot waterbed. I mean, goodness me, they'd pile on him with a cat. So some breeds would pack, yes, pile together comfortably and probably get more distressed when they're not with their group. And other breeds, yep, I can sleep by myself and be nearby. I do not need to be physically touched when I'm asleep. I'm one
Yes.
of those. Yes, I'm one of those.
Yeah.
So sitting on
I
airplanes for me,
have.
ugh.
Ugh.
May the seat next to me always be empty because I'll have an aisle. Thank you very much. I'll never sit next to the window or lack of window. Ooh.
No, never. Mm. Okay. So we have multiple dogs, and what are some things that these dogs should learn as a group, do you think, versus
Well,
individual training?
yeah. I mean, anything they're going to do as a group will be magnified because the group is doing it. So if you've got visitors coming to the house and one of them gets aroused and you've got three dogs, three of them are going to be not three times as aroused, nine times as aroused. So they multiply each other's behaviors quite quickly. Um, and if that is, you know, defense at the door, that will multiply quite quickly as well. Or as
Yes, it
to
will.
redirect onto the other dogs. So anything where the dogs are going to do it as a group needs considerable management to stop the emotional behavior of the group overwhelming the behavior of the individuals. And people would call that the riot effect, because we know situations where people, perfectly normal, well behaved people, get them in a group and they're like, goodness me, I never expect to behave like that. So there's that sense of having to respond as a group is part of probably the connection of the group. So a group that's
Hmm.
strongly connected will defend as a group. Yes, will attack as a group. Will chase as a group. Um, but certain behaviors, even so, would not transfer to another. So one of my collies is absolutely besotted with, not in a good way, of hot air balloons. If she sees one of those coming over, we get the most ferocious call for the rest of the group to defend the entire estate from this, fire breathing dragon. And all the other dogs are like, get out of it, whatever, not bothered at all. Even her own puppies are like, yeah, yeah, no, no, whatever. Doesn't bother us, it can do what it likes. But heaven help us if we hear delivery vans coming and she sounds off, everybody's there at the gate to help her out. In actual fact,
Wow.
she does nothing else except sound them off and wait for everybody else to get them out. So dogs have different roles. She's the alarm, and she expects everybody else to do the doing. I'm just waiting for her to go deaf because she's 13 now. She's coming up 14 now. Just, soon she'll be deaf.
Oh, then
So,
she'll just feel the
if you're going to take
vibrations.
the dogs for a walk as a group, you need to make sure that you can manage them as a group in those conditions. And managing a group takes more management than managing the single. So if
Oh,
you are going to have multiple dogs, you must invest time in that protocol.
yes. Oh my goodness. Which does require a bit of time teaching separately. You know, the
Teaching
building.
individuals,
Yeah.
certainly, but then they also need to learn what they need to do when they're a group. So I have group come away from the gate. It's not an individual thing, and I've never trained them individually to come away from the gate, but it
Hmm.
means there's free kitchen on the kitchen floor. If you want it, first come, first served. And that's sort of practiced frequently so that I'm using the group dynamics, their desire to compete against each other to get there first. And the outcome is they come away from the gate. Or
Ah.
not being left out. This fear of missing out is strong in a group of dogs. If it's separate rooms and they hear one dog doing something in the other room, oh, they've got to go and check it out. What am I missing out on? Somebody's licking out a bowl in the other room. I assure you, every dog will wake up from wherever it is and come and check it out. So we
Exactly.
can
Hmm.
use that little bit, that fear of missing out, as a motivator to respond to what the rest of the pack are doing. And you can certainly do that with the litter. The individuals in a litter don't like to be the last one, and some of them do like to be the first one. So say that the puppies are going out for an outing into the garden. There's usually one brave one that goes, yeah, 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 cool, we'll go and have a look around the garden. And if everybody follows them, that will endorse that behavior, that supports that behavior. But if he goes out on his own and the other six stay in the doorway, he will start to feel that vacuum behind him and not have the security of the group, so they'll go back to the house. It works the opposite way, where if you've got a litter of six puppies, if five of them follow the mother and one of them is stuck sniffing something while they're busy on, they'll feel the absence of the other puppies around them and woof, they want to catch up as soon as possible. So there's that sense of being adventurous is good if people are going to support you when you're young, which often you'll see people with a puppy. The puppy's going to have a look at something. Now, because the person's attached to the puppy and they don't want to pull or restrain the puppy, they'll follow the puppy. That endorses that behavior of whatever the puppy's doing, which is nearly always, it might be chasing a leaf, looking at a frog, but what it's doing is going away from the person and the person runs along behind.
Mm.
So we end
Mm.
up, we are the people that teach these puppies to pull or to run away from us because we've just been well-intentioned people.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
handling all of this dynamics. I mean, you can overwhelm yourself. Oh my god, if I do this, this is going to go wrong. If I do that, that's going to go wrong. And I can't do this. I must do this. I must do that. But there is a certain amount of common sense that's got to come in. When we're trying to do the right thing, we can end up doing the wrong thing just because we're trying to do the right thing.
Sure. Sure. What are some of I mean, you mentioned being able to walk with your dogs, multiple dogs at once, but what are some other behaviors that you just really focus on? I hear so much stuff about feeding. Uh, you need to,
Yeah,
feed them
yeah.
separately. What do you
Again,
do?
I think it depends on a lot depends on what you're feeding. So, because I've fed raw food for over 25 years now, what we used to get were quite hefty bones, and
Hmm.
because I don't like the gubbins off the bone all over the house, it's a garden activity. Now, if I give the bones out, they all come to me where the box is, and as I hand them the bones, they will go off down the garden.
And they'll respect each other and,
So they'll go off around the
and
garden and choose their own amount of space to feel comfortable to chew the bones in, which for some of them is quite spacious. But just as
mm,
equally, one of them, he'd see the others eating somewhere, and even though he had one, he'd want theirs. So he always had to
yeah,
be on his own because he was just a git for wanting everybody else's bones.
okay,
But
okay.
I've had others that would lie within inches of each other and chew comfortably.
Hmm.
So I suppose
Yeah.
it depends on the threat that the other dogs face. I personally don't allow bullying, and I wouldn't allow, even if they're feeding out of the bowls, I don't allow crossovers.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
allow them to leave one bowl and go and dip into another.
Go get
No, when
another.
you finish,
Yeah,
you can leave the room. That's fine.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, what they're not
yeah,
allowed to do is start to muscle in on another dog's food.
yeah, Yeah, you have to pay attention to that
Oh
stuff,
yeah,
boy.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
And if the puppy's getting fed 3 times a day, well, that can often be an opening for the other dogs to muscle in and want some of what the puppy's getting. So with
sure.
that management, the puppy just needs to be able to be fed separately and not have to gobble their food down to stop the others getting it.
Yeah,
Again,
that
they
is not
should be
a.
allowed to be relaxed eating, to not get indigestion, to not be stressed. The
Yeah,
pleasure of a
yeah.
bone is to be able to lie down and not worry about what's going to happen to it. It's yours. Don't worry about it. I'll
Mhm,
look after that.
mhm. So you talked about uh, group dynamics at the garden gate,
Mm.
the delivery, the garden gate, the delivery. Any other dynamics that you really look for? Sleeping?
Well, yeah, and if you're giving a treat, so I had something left over in the fridge the other day, and I thought, okay, they can all have one of these, and I use it as an opportunity to remind everybody of everybody's name.
Oh,
So my name is mine, but your name is not mine. That sounds
okay.
logical, but we have to
Yeah.
teach youngsters that they each have their own name, and somebody else's name means whatever's happening is not you. And that comes out of old, old sheepdog training, where you want to work two dogs on sheep at the same time. Um, so in Wales, they'll tend to work them with different. So we'll work one in English and one in Welsh. So I might say go left in English to one dog and go left in Welsh to the other dog, so that the English dog doesn't know what the Welsh words mean. But even though they don't know what the words mean, we want them to actually stand still when they hear that word. And I'd like that as a default. So if I call one dog, the other dogs should stay where they are. Yes, so it's a cue. So if I call Flink, all the others will just stand still. So the gateway, and actually I can do it now. She is getting deaf. She needs a hand signal to come, and none of the others would move on that hand signal. So although she can't hear her name, if I say Flink and give her the hand signal, the others will stand still as I open the gate, so that she will come through without the others. I remember going to see a hound kennels. I must have been about 16 or 17. And the guy used to. So the hounds, you have the females or the males in separate packs for obvious reasons. And they feed them cooked food, but they tend to cook it on site themselves. So they go to the abattoir and collect various bits and pieces. And tradition meant that a lot of the casualty carcasses were sent to the hounds. So because these often died through things they didn't know, they used to cook the meat. So it used to smell something disgusting. They'd have this broiler house where they'd just have this massive cauldron of ugh. And then they would tip this into a trough that was probably about 18 foot long. One dinner
Okay.
bowl, 18-foot long, like a trough, like a water trough.
Yeah.
And this would all be prepared in the feeding room. And the huntsman, would go to the kennel door and call in each of the dogs individually. Now there's 50 standing out there waiting to come in, and all the hounds were called with a name beginning with B. That's their hound group. It'd be Bezic, Betha, and Bridget. And I go, how did he remember 50 dogs' names? Was
Yeah.
wow. And he'd call them through in order of the skinniest would come first. Yep, so they would have
Mhm.
a bit longer on the food trench than the other dogs. And you'd have, they're all standing at the doorway. They're about 5 deep. And he could call Bezig from the back, yes, and she'd muscle her way all the way through and come through the door. Wow. So this is not new science. This is just ancient dog management that has been passed down from generation to generation. And he didn't know their names. They just knew that if he looked at them, he was talking about them. But the other dogs knew that he wasn't looking at them, he wasn't talking to them.
Hmm.
So it was the look, you. Yep. And you can do the same with
Yeah.
your dog. So, you and you open the gate, or you and you offer a treat, and that's the dog that'll come and get the treat. So those
Okay.
cues are selecting one dog at the same time means not you. And when it's a not you, you just stay where you are.
And how do you teach that? I mean, it's so rare for me to
Probably,
ask,
I
hey,
mean,
how do you teach it? I know how to teach it, but
Well, I
And
mean,
how?
I used to teach it so that the little Gordons, I was feeding them chicken wings, and they're about 5.5, 6 weeks old, and they'd have just
Mhm.
like a third of a digit each. Well, you can't put down a bowl of 12 wings because
No.
Arnold would have five of them in one mouthful, and the others would get nothing. So I'd stand there with the bowl, and I'd start on one side, and I'd pick one up, and I'd give him to you. Now, if the others tried to get it, I probably just moved it out the way. Yep, so I'd pass it to a puppy, he'd take it. Look, pass it. Look, pass it. Yep, so the numbers diminish as they go along. Um, so whoever was, as you're going down the road, they would work out that it's coming, don't worry about it. And I never put them in a situation where there was any less than the number needed. And I could also sort them in the sense that the boys had the slightly larger ones than the girls. And as I'm doing this, I'm also reminding myself who's who because I want to remember their names. So this is how they learnt their names as I'm giving them their chicken wing. Arnold, good. Albert, cool. Kent, yeah, and I'd look at them and try and remember who they were. Pretty much like the hound group. So they learnt that at 6 weeks old. I've got photographs of them all sitting in front of me or standing in front of me waiting for their piece of food. So, if your breeder can start that off and even deliberately, so you just don't put down a platter of, mushy mince, I would gather some in my hands and here's yours, good. And here is yours, super. So they would learn that the hand that's coming to them is theirs. And if you really have got others that are going to fight their way in, you need to have your other hand free to block them. So you can just manage to give one dog a treat at a time, which is good practice. Anybody that's in something like daycare, or you must have this if you have groups of dogs together, you've got to be
Hmm.
able to select the one dog and give a treat to them, which I think is about us giving a strong focus to the one dog. And you can do it with affection to start with. So they could all be around you, and you look at one and you make a big gesture to take your hand to their chin and give them a little bit of a tickle under the chin. So the dogs recognize that the forthcoming hand is going to who the owner of that hand is focused on. I wouldn't deceive them in the sense and look at the one and go, it's not yours, and then fuss another dog.
Oh,
Because they're looking for
no.
that.
Yeah.
And dogs are pretty cute at knowing focal points. you know, again, which comes out of cooperative hunting. So if we're hunting as a group, and again, it comes off the sheep work. So I've got 30 sheep in the corner of the field, and I've got a dog by the side of me, and I need one of those sheep out because I need to do some husbandry on her. As soon as I focus on her and make a dive for her, that dog will know which one I'm going for. I don't teach that, they know which one I'm going for. I mean, this must cover off cooperative hunting because if we're all trying to kill different sheep, we're not going to win. If I'm going in for one, everybody's got to help me kill that one or, catch that one. If five dogs all go for different sheep, well, we just wouldn't win. So that must come somewhere in that sort of innate behaviors that if I've got a strong dive for this one, I'm going to win on that.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I mean, that makes
And you
sense.
probably
Yeah.
see that to some effect with people, where something like there's a heckle from an audience or a performer on a stage picks out one person out the crowd and focuses on them. The rest of the crowd know it. There's
Yeah.
something in that there, that selection of that focal point, that strong focus. Everyone's aware of it.
Ah, I'm so glad to hear that it's okay to have lots of dogs.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, many people have owned lots of dogs over the last thousands of years without having to resort to, nastiness to be able to manage them. I remember going to Crufts, mm, again, probably in the early 70s, and there was this woman who used to show flat coat retrievers. And I remember following her in, and she probably had about 7 or 8 dogs with her, and a trolley with all her bits and pieces in, and a chair. Yeah. And all these dogs, of course, on lead because it's in London and it's on the street. And as she's going in, all these dogs are just hanging out around her. I mean, they're knitting, the leads are all tied up all over the place, but they're just hanging out. None of them are pulling. All happy as Larry. And I thought, yeah, one day, one day. But
Yeah.
those dogs
Yeah.
individually knew how to walk with her. The leads were there as a safety. I
Yes.
have no doubt
Oh,
she could
it's
have just managed them just as easily without the leads.
yeah. Yeah. It's so beautiful.
Mm,
So
mm.
beautiful. So, that's can I just say what I call when all my dogs are barking at the the delivery people and stuff? We call it a hillbilly doorbell.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's what we call